What is a pentatonic scale?
Well, your basic blues minor pentatonic scale would be the root, the minor third, the fourth, the fifth, and then the seventh, flat seven.
Why don't you show me?
I hate that guitar. All right, classic rock has never played on a nylon string guitar, but since our illustrious documentary man owns one, here's your A pentatonic scale. I made it sound a little more interesting than it is, but 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes, and here's your octave, which is not considered an extra note in the scale. So there you go.
That's the pentatonic scale, essentially.
Yes. So
that's the root of classic rock, you could argue, essentially, right?
Yes, especially this, when you do it up an octave and then you fool around with it, but I refuse to do that on this guitar because the strings feel like worms. Pentatonic.
How do you personally define the term classic rock?
To me, classic rock is everything that I kind of grew up with, and I guess it would stop for me by the time maybe I joined Kiss or something like that, because in some ways it feels like it was just rock and roll was passed on to new generations, and you can define each decade a bit. There's of course the British invasion. The 70s things really evolved quite a bit, and I still think that's very much classic rock too. But by the 80s you get into like maybe the hair metal bands, okay, which would I say that Def Leppard and Kiss are classic rock? I could, okay, but not the same when I've experienced seeing Hendrix at the Garden as a teenager. If you're a fan of classic cars, there's probably a cutoff point, okay? And you've heard that term probably. And I do think that music seems to always write its own rules, though, and seems to always follow paths that no one can ever predict. Okay, so that band that changed the 90s, let's say like Nirvana, maybe to some people, that's classic rock already because it's been so many years. Mm-hmm. Seems odd to me.
Yeah.
Okay, but maybe not odd to someone else. Nor is it necessarily odd to the station that's known for classic rock, the radio station that's maybe even very famous for classic rock, playing Soundgarden or playing something even new, which is unusual. One of the local Los Angeles stations actually recently gave the show in the afternoon over to one of the punk guys, Jonesy's jukebox, and I hear him play some amazing things, some stuff I forgot, some stuff I love, obviously some more things that I don't know. But just to think, the concept, I was like I was actually really happy because they broke the rule of some formula of radio programming, okay, and went with a show where the guy's going to play what he wants, interview who he wants, bring in people. I think that was good, which is, again, just ways that I think the music business plays by its own rules, always. Where I really doubt if you had an amazing 1990s Corvette that would be considered a classic, okay, to the car people. I don't know a lot about the car business, but you follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And here we are trying to define music in a category with the question of what is classic rock. So I think it's going to be different for a lot of people, but for me, probably the cutoff is going to be by the time maybe disco happened, I'm done with it. You know what I mean? Anything pre that, it's pretty much classic rock. Mm-hmm. And then the bands that I've worked with, that I really made a very large contribution to for my resume, some of them are truly classic rock, okay, which would be, obviously working with Meatloaf. Certainly Kiss that's, I don't know. I don't know how do you want to categorize. I think Kiss breaks all the rules anyways, mm-hmm. as a musical band with such an incredible, unique history, But Grand Funk, obviously, which has been my gig now for all these years, much longer even than Kiss, and the 17th year of me performing with them now, since the end of 99, 2000. They're clearly classic rock. So when I meet somebody on the plane, and I fly a lot, and they say, oh, you look like a musician, who you play with, I say, Grand Funk Railroad. Most of the time they've heard of it or they know a song by the band. But lots of times, if I just want to generalize it because I don't have the time, I'll just say, I play with a classic rock band, Sometimes I refer to it as like a heritage rock band, or whatever. And they kind of know then that that's somebody that was famous, in the past, but that music is still very valid in so many places. I would like to define classic rock more by an era. I know in my mind it's easier to say that Nirvana is not classic rock, okay? Even though I'm not changing the channel when it comes on, I like them, you know what I mean? But when I hear The Who and when I hear the Rolling Stones, I'm talking about more of the more earlier stuff, of course, it throws me back to what I think is the kind of the beginnings of classic rock music. We know that there was Elvis before that, and Chuck Berry, and artists like that really building what was to become, this incredibly gigantic revolution in music. And obviously the Beatles in '64 coming to America changed the world. They were already popular, of course, in England and in parts of Europe, but that was it. They just took over, and it started the wave of British, bands.
In my mind, if I had to really pick a date to say this is when classic rock started, I would say February 9th, 1964. That's my opinion.
I like so many other contemporary musicians like myself, or people in the industry, or just fans. If you were old enough to understand what was on TV that night in February of '64 on the Ed Sullivan Show, which was popular anyway. People always watched that. That was like a family thing for my parents and my brother and I to watch. Oddly enough, even though the show looks pretty odd if you looked at the rest of the show that the Beatles actually performed on. But, Ed Sullivan getting them to perform really did change the entire music industry, and probably was the start of certainly the British invasion and rock and roll, the way we still celebrate it, but in arguably classic rock, like you said. I was home watching it, black and white, there it was. I'm jumping up and down on my bed, singing along, and knew that this was something incredible, okay? There was no doubt that their energy and their talent and the fun that they had doing that just really made everybody feel something wonderful, okay? America was going through like some really tough things, the president was just assassinated, in November the year before, and that was pretty devastating for everybody. It was definitely a big down, and I do think that music's something that can like kind of lift everybody's spirit, and even if the parents were kind of threatened, my parents did, it wasn't a big deal, okay, but even if there was that kind of generational gap of like, I don't know. In fact, just recently, the Grammy Museum in Los Angeles was showing everything about, very specifically, the entry of the Beatles to America and changing the world, okay? So it didn't go too much later. It went to like the touring years in America, 64, 65, 66. And it was great because I loved the, obviously the stuff that they showcased, and they had some video, but there was no doubt that their impact was so important, and how everybody's world just kind of like was upside down, and it just changed the touring industry, merchandising, obviously musical styles, because of all the other bands that maybe sounded a bit like them or wanted to be like them or wanted to be the anti-Beatles. It's just the Beatles really. I don't think they had some huge master plan of what was going to happen, but the truth was, everybody wanted to know what was happening with them and to them, and what they started in the sense of music.
Do you think there could ever be another Kiss or Zeppelin or any band of that scale again today, or are those days over?
I would hope to think that there could be a band of some either an artist like the David Bowie that's so unique, and even though he had a band supporting him at all times, but but there could be an artist that could impact us in a similar way. I'm not very confident about it, okay, to be honest. I think a lot of the way the industry is a problem that may even hinder that, okay, but I do have to hope that talent, can rise to the top, as they say. The cream always rises, right? What's interesting is that some of the pop artists, they'll have an element of rock and roll in it, Monty Pittman is the guitar player for Madonna, and he looks kind of like, he's got the beard down to here. He kind of looks a little darker than your typical classic rock musician, but he's an incredible guitar player, you know what I mean? He plays with Madonna. Actually, even gives Madonna guitar lessons, okay? Rihanna was using the guy from Extreme, Nuno Betancourt, okay? So you get what I mean, that some of these pop stars, all right, Madonna, of course, has been around quite a while, but still, she's not rock and roll, although she wound up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but that's a whole other discussion, okay? What I'm saying is it's interesting that some of the new pop artists, especially if we're more specific with like a Taylor Swift or a Rihanna, that are these huge, artists for the younger people, they'll use that element in their, performance and in their sound. But are they rock and roll? Not the way we're really discussing rock and roll. Mm-hmm. But I like that. I mean, I think that's awesome, because I do want that young girl who sees Taylor Swift and that's her whole world, and she'll watch her YouTube video or buy her record and know every word of every song on her new release. I wanted to hear a smoking guitar player, burn it up, because he wouldn't be there if it wasn't for classic rock. Okay, he wouldn't be there if it wasn't for all the things that we celebrate in guitar, in the guitar universe. I do feel there's some really talented pop artists out there that are very talented performers, singers. They get great songs. Usually, if they can't write it themselves, they work with some really talented people. But my lack of enthusiasm for some of the huge pop artists is it is a little more about the dance and the show, and I think there's a formula there that's not as genuine as what started with the British invasion of bands. Okay. I don't think the intention is bad. They're trying to relate to it's for a younger audience, that, and I do think that they seem to plug into what people would like to express, but in general, it's less about a real uniqueness. There just seems to be too much of a pop song, kind of formula, Beats are important for some of the artists, especially the ones that are closer to rap, if you know what I mean. But again, country has moved, and some of the artists that you think would have been in country years ago, they moved a bit center to pop, and all of a sudden some of those have taken over, and some of the country artists are incredible rockers. So I don't think there's like any I don't have a disdain for the fact that someone may take a working formula, okay, meaning great pop songs that's helped out by some the hot like recent producers, and then help mold them, and then because they're unique or attractive enough or different enough that it connects with young people, do I see that as being as maybe would the longevity be there for those artists? I don't think so, okay, and I don't always understand why it doesn't matter how many times the Who wants to tour, they will sell out wherever they play. Okay, it's pretty remarkable. And Kiss, with all the changes they've gone through, are able to continue to do very well, which I embrace, because people then, new generations are turned on to Kiss, even if I'm not there for all these years, and they want to look up Kiss. And nowadays, everybody can, information is right in front of you on your, smartphone, on your computer, your laptop, your iPad, whatever. And next thing I know, they're watching a video of me, and they're like fascinated, which is good. But will people be looking at some of the current pop artists in 20, 30 years from now in the same way? I don't know. Maybe that will be their nostalgia, and it'll be interesting. But I'm just very, very proud and very, very happy that I grew up in an era that I could really feel like it's my own of that British invasion, and that it's really, really thrilling to me always. Of course, I love it when I see a young kid walking around with a Kiss shirt, any era. I sometimes even see my era on their shirt, you know, but to see a Led Zeppelin shirt or something, or see the Beatles and the kid is not even 20, it just shows the power of that music and the fact that it still really rings a chord. You go to any local music store and you're going to run into the guy playing Stairway to Heaven, or he might be playing some detuned kind of thrash band too, but there's always going to be some of that classic rock being played, and it'll be remarkably from a very young person, and it just shows the power of the music. People like the Jimmy Pages and obviously Eric Clapton and Jimi Hendrix, and then if you go to Next Generation, in my mind, even though Van Halen became famous in the 70s, late 70s, it was Eddie Van Halen, who really just took Eric Clapton and just pushed it to another level. That's the way I see Eddie, and I always feel like he's also a hero to me, because I feel like here's a guy that really gets what inspired me, but then he made it his own and brought it up a notch. It's not that he made it better, but he made it kind of like faster and more, intense. Yeah, kind of on steroids. Like I look at him like, he's the souped up muscle car version of Eric Clapton, And it wasn't surprising to me when not too long ago I saw some of the guitar press show him playing in an early interview, note for note, Crossroads from Cream, okay, in a hotel room with an interview, and it had Eddie's phrasing, but it was like it was as if that's all he listened to was Eric Clapton for quite a few years, and I always had that kind of respect for him. Anyway, I didn't need to hear that to know, okay, but you see how it's all connected. Everyone seems to be influenced by someone and maybe takes that and makes it their own. One of the joys I get from my resume is, and especially the Kiss years, is seeing how that music is very passed down to each generation. So that fan that saw me in concert, he brings his son or daughter, okay? And sometimes they're really young, and even if they're a little confused, they're attracted to it because, that's part of the wonders of music, okay? People are always attracted to that. And I love the fact that sometimes it's even the teenager that came with the dad that's even equally excited or even more excited to meet me, and he wasn't even born when I was performing that video that he might know, or that album that he loves my guitar playing from. And I see it especially when I went to see Paul McCartney a couple of years back at Dodger Stadium, which was obviously it's a real joy to see him perform and hear his music, but to be one with the 50,000 or so people in that arena, rather that stadium, that was mind-blowing for me. I'm not a big fan of crowds, actually, so there's a part of me that's kind of like, like freaked out about it. But to be honest, everybody was there. The shared affection for this music, for this man, for this, I think they're celebrating even more than the moment, if you get what I mean. And it's infectious. And what I saw at that stadium gig, or what I'll even see at a Graham Funk show, is generations enjoying the music. So I'll see a very young child staring at my fingers, watching what I do on the guitar, and yet I see the maybe Vietnam, vet kind of guy who's clearly a Graham Funk fan, or I'll see the, more typical Kiss fan, in the front with his Kiss shirt, and they're watching what I do, and enjoying the music. And that's not to say that the casual person that comes to one of these gigs that happens to be at the casino or the fair or the, street festival that I get to perform with, they're all drawn to, Graham Funk. Oh, okay. Yeah. Let me go check that out. And then they're really going kind of crazy by the end of the show. And if they have any family with them, everybody's enjoying it. It's really remarkable. It's one of the biggest joys I get. Now, it was really easy touring with Kiss. You know, the fans are there and they love you, okay? And you just want to do a great job and you have fun. It becomes a whole love fest on stage. Grand Funk, we always have a little more to prove because we're doing a more general crowd of people. It isn't like, they're not all like there because they're fanatics about Grand Funk. They just know that they know of the band or they are a fan, but they're coming out because it's an event or a venue that we're up at this beautiful casino out in Connecticut. Let's go check out Grand Funk. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's kind of like an additional thing to where they are. Or the city festival, the city will put on a huge event and there'll be 10,000 people there and the sponsors involved and everything, but it easily could have been another band, okay, that night, okay, but they all going to have a great time. And the power of the music, and I could say the power of classic rock, which is just timeless music to me, and I think that everybody just really enjoys it, and the generations that are in attendance, it's an equal amount of enjoyment, which really blows my mind, because some of them are reliving the time on the AM radio they heard "I'm Your Captain," let's say, in their car, or FM radio, in their old car, right, in from the 70s, maybe picking up their future wife, and maybe like when I played with Meatloaf, it was a big deal about Paradise by the Dashboard Light, which kind of sets the stage, the song. But how many people like that meant so much to, in that album, and then to think that same person who really heard it the first time, just like I can't get out of my mind every time I hear "Hello Goodbye" by the Beatles. I could see myself in my parents' kitchen, in Queens, for the first time hearing that song, okay, and just hearing it on transistor radio in the kitchen and going like, obviously they say anything that, the Beatles, I'm going to be drawn to right away. And then I go like, oh, another amazing song. Love this, love this, love this. So I relive that, I remember also hearing that Jimi Hendrix died in September 1970 on the radio. I know where I was, and it was the same kitchen, the same radio, sadly, but there's that connection happens at the concert. I'm getting closer to your home, if that meant something to them because they were against the Vietnam War, and the song is related to things like that. And yet the younger person who's heard the song because it's a brilliant tune, and has all these different sections, in fact 2 titles, "I'm Your Captain," but I'm getting closer to home, and how I can get everybody to do this, with my hand, the power of music. It's wonderful. And this is no different than that connection that I have when I see a guitar, a certain model. I see like a Sunburst Les Paul. I'm going to think of a few of the artists that were iconic from a Sunburst Les Paul. Like, first one would be Jimmy Page, of course, from Led Zeppelin, because he seemed to always play that. A later generation may say, well, Slash played a Sunburst Les Paul, a Strat, although he played every color and variation possible, but a Fender Stratocaster would be Jimi Hendrix, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a certain era of Pete Townsend, you got to think of an SG Special. You get what I'm saying? There's that connection with an instrument, and that's why there's such a powerful kind of like internal trigger. It's almost like, when you smell good food, all of a sudden you're salivating, the Pavlov thing. And I think it happens with trigger points of physical things, or a photo of even will take you to that joyful time when you realized I saw some musical genius playing a Fender Stratocaster. So that's why the music industry, with the guitar stores and the magazines and the thing, there's a strong desire for it, because it's not much different than the people who love cars, and they're gonna look at the car magazines and go to the car shows. I'm really looking forward. There's a guitar show coming up in California, and I happen to be home that weekend, so I could go. And I'm like really like excited about it. Because I mean, they're living art, but each one, when I see a 12-string Rickenbacker that's Fireglow, I think of George Harrison when he got his. When I see that walnut stained, brown Gretsch, you're thinking early Beatles, or the violin bass, you think of Paul McCartney. So it's really, really incredible how that connection happens, and the same thing happens when the people hear the songs and they relive those moments. And there's just so many amazing anthems from the classic rock that take people to these places. But it's kind of funny how even just the guitar can trigger it.
So image matters, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very conscious of, I'm attracted to what I'm attracted to, but I certainly, coming from 12 years in KISS, I learned a lot about image matters. But I'd like to also say that, music matters. You know what I mean? There's no doubt that Woodstock and these festivals that were just huge got a lot of press and showed the power of what was happening in the world and how music was influencing people's emotions towards politics, war. Vietnam was a hotbed, terrible dilemma for America, and sending young people off, to fight in a faraway land seemed very confusing to many people. I know I couldn't get my head around it, and I almost could have been drafted, but I think that the festivals were really important in the sense of them being showing an extreme power of this music and how the movement of the music was bringing huge crowds never seen before for music, that in America at least. Woodstock really had such an incredible roster of bands. I mean, I really wanted to go. I was at a camp that was maybe less than 50 miles, 100 miles away, but I was a little too young, and nobody there was going to say, like, come on, we're all going to Woodstock, but I was dying to go. I mean, watching the movie and seeing, what was happening in the sense of the logistics of it. I'm not sorry, and I was a little too young for that, true. But certainly if I was 20 and like had the spirit and the, age level that it was more appropriate, I could see why it was life-changing for everybody. Not all the festivals were quite that, insane or mudfest, that it turned into. But look at the performances that came out of Woodstock. That movie, which I was fascinated with when it came out, and I still enjoy it when I've seen it on cable TV and all. And the music is just, I'll never forget, the Who's, performance, or what Hendrix did, and the Star Spangled Banner, which I do my own way when I perform, but I kind of channel that, so the fact that every night when I perform with Grand Funk and do that, or do it at an event like at an arena for the KISS football team, I did that this year. I am thinking of that Woodstock performance by Hendrix, even though I'm not playing it, the same or always in the same even register as him, but the inspiration is from what he did. And it just shows, here I am all these years later, not thinking of like, oh, well, I'm going to do this. No, I'm thinking of Woodstock, Jimi Hendrix, and the fact that he made it so iconic. Many things need to be influenced from something else, okay? And there's no doubt, without the 50s, and something very important that I'll share with you from the 50s, I don't think rock would have been able to quite resonate the same way sonically. And that would be, this guy's name was Les Paul, okay? And Les Paul was an artist, of course, that came, I'm not going to say I'm an authority on Les Paul, even though I've collected, albums of his and did get to meet him, that he signed for me, which was a real thrill. But we all know, of course, his name is iconic on many instruments made by Gibson. But he was involved with, actually, first as being an artist and an inventor, things that actually became multi-track recording, things with echo, things with studio tricks that all really gave an incredible, an opportunity for music to be shared in a very creative way that would catch your ear. I mean, the Beatles certainly enjoyed fooling around in the studio quite a bit, especially as the 60s went on. But think about that, Les Paul originally was just struggling with whatever was available then, which was like putting a pickup on generally a hollow body jazz guitar, and he's trying to compete with other musicians and everything, and he just took it to the next level and started to experiment every way that he could with the knowledge that he had and the desire to make an instrument louder and do some creative things with it. So he came from the 50s. His music's very kind of 50s oriented too, but that influenced people like Jeff Beck and all. Sonically speaking, the amps and the equipment and the gear did evolve, okay? It was very interesting. That was another thing that was real magical in this era that we like to call the classic rock from the 60s, how, you take a drummer whose name was Jim Marshall, who owned a drum store, realizing that, all right, the amp's got to be louder than my drum kit or whatever his desire, and all of a sudden he's working with some people to help make a louder amp. And then in the right hands, like in Eric Clapton, with one of his Marshall combos, you get this sound that we still seek out. If I'm in a music store and I hear a tone that's kind of like an early Marshall that Clapton played on the John Mayall album, my ear is just drawn to that, and that's what I want. Everybody wants to buy the pedal that will sound like that, make your amp sound like that. Jim Marshall wanted to, create an amp that could compete with a drum set played very loudly. So now the amps were getting bigger and louder and more sophisticated. And Fender, they work on these guitar designs that, evolve and wind up to become super important tools in the hands of these creative artists from the 60s.
We've established clearly that classic rock starts in the 60s. What was the importance of the 50s?
The 50s, it's a great question, because one thing I think people didn't embrace or understand, and then when they kind of maybe stepped in it, they realized it was cool, and the word is distortion. Okay, there's some harmonic distortion on Elvis Presley records. It wasn't intentional, though. It was just the quality of things weren't great. The speed that you had in your studio, that if there's a little bit on the mic or a little bit through one of the recorded instruments, it was like, boom, go, record, But later on, they started to discover new sounds, and distortion was one of them. And when it was done the right way, like the early Fender amps of the 50s were turned up loud. I just pulled out two of my old Deluxes, and we're talking 53 era, and the late 57, like 57, 58, these Tweed models are very, very iconic, and people really are drawn to those. They will distort. I don't think they necessarily were meant to distort that much, but you turn it up loud enough, and there you have that sound. The first time Paul McCartney had his hands on one of these fuzz pedals, which is just something adjusted in a little pedal that was early transistors type stuff. And then the Beatles asking questions, what if we take that channel and put it into the other channel to make it even brighter? And then, of course, that engineer that's trained by EMI and at Abbey Road to make everything sound pure and clean goes okay, because that's opposite of what they were trying to do. And certainly Les Paul wanted to break all the rules too by making a guitar that was loud enough. The 60s embraced much more creative ways to use electronics to, make the sound more unique. And the 50s, I think, was a purer sound. You might have had slapback echo, but you certainly didn't have a phase shifter, and you didn't have a univibe, and which is these fancy types of chorus pedals that rotate the sound. You didn't have the distortion that nobody was really using it much. And there are artists in the 50s that were breaking ground by by pushing the limits. But it all really just kind of came together and became a real obsession for the artists in the 60s and the people that worked for them. You know, the Beatles had guys working on stuff. Hendrix had an electronics guy to keep fooling around with things. All of a sudden, a wah-wah pedal was developed, you know, which really became very identifiable in classic rock. And there's various opinions as to how that started, but in the 50s they were experimenting, but I don't think the fruits of the, you know, of those planted seeds were quite developed and enjoyed the same way.
Would you say that the British invasion artists were the first artists to really kind of master putting all these things together?
They had the perfect opportunity in the 60s to take all these new toys, let's call them, and be creative with them. You know, let's mention an iconic Stones song, Satisfaction, okay? And there's that kind of like this fuzz pedal on that riff that you can't get out of your head when you hear the song, okay? And let's face it, that pedal helped define that song, you know. Now, I'm not saying the song wasn't brilliant anyway, okay? But again, these toys, these tools, these new electronic things that were being presented and worked on and developed, those artists, you know, were able to very creatively, you know, include it into the songs. And obviously, I don't have to remind you of an album like Sgt. Pepper, which, you know what happened, that they pushed the envelope so far, you know, that it eventually just got overblown and too much, you know, in which case you got back to some of the 70s bands that were popular were a little more straight ahead, you know, Grand Funk for one of them, you know, and didn't get very extreme. It was just about good time music, you know, played well and sung well. But the 60s were a very, very creative era, playing with all these elements of sound.
What did the punk movement do?
There must have been a backlash in some of the bands from the punk thing to just be, you didn't have to be a great player, you didn't have to be a great singer. It was all about some sort of angst, energy, anger. Some of it I know came out that they weren't happy with the politics in England, and those bands were very much FU to the you know, the whole British hierarchy and everything. It's interesting that a style of music that's so not classic rock, even though Aerosmith proved that you can make something that's kind of cool and rock and make it a rap song like Walk This Way would Run DMC, but that whole rap, you know, genre of music started out also being an FU to society. Just in general, it was a way of them expressing their anger and angst, like punk. I see it that way. So there's always this edge to certain new movements of music that seems to resonate with people, and truly, in some ways, the rappers became the rock stars of that generation for those people, because they were the ones they looked up to. They were kind of dangerous, and the punk definitely stripped down rock and roll. It's certainly fair to say that the grunge movement and that whole Seattle sound and wearing flannel shirts and not trying to behave like a very overblown rock star, which became very big in the 80s with the hair bands, okay? I do think that kind of just put the brakes on a lot of that, which seemed to run its course anyway, okay? And by detuning the guitars, you're sonically getting darker, deeper, bigger, by using more distortion, by getting the register, the vocals for the people from the grunge artists to be a lower one. Again, they're very emotional as well, still, because you need to connect with people. But Eddie Vedder is not singing where Journey sang, okay? And it's not to say that Journey's less important than a grunge band or a Soundgarden. Chris Cornell is an incredible singer, you know. But here you have guys and a sonic vibe from these bands and a image from these bands that's the anti-image. The sounds are different. They're still well-constructed songs, which is why I did like a lot of the grunge music, but I did see it kind of threatening and destroying the hair metal era, okay? And it was something that I was definitely aware of, but at the same time, I was attracted to it too. And I'll admit that I was more attracted to grunge than I was attracted to punk coming along and kind of putting the brakes on whatever was going on in the 70s.
So did grunge kind of mirror what punk did?
In a general sense, it changed people's musical appetite. Well, working obviously with Kiss, Gene and Paul being the creators of the band, we all know the era, of course, that Ace and Peter were involved with them, but once those guys left, it was really always Gene and Paul's, ship to steer, and they certainly were very confident, and they knew what they wanted and which way they were headed, although the music industry is a free-for-all, really. So you do always have to think about what you want and where you're headed and how to get there. But every time there was some sort of creative thing, I needed to earn my kind of like respect from them. They knew I was a talented guitarist, but in the sense of like now writing songs or getting involved in their compositions for the albums, or any other opinions that I might have towards making the band the best it can be, it took time for me to prove myself. The most awkward point would be, let's say Paul had a point and Gene feels somewhat differently, and then, what do you think, Bruce? And I'm like, that wasn't comfortable for me. Okay, because you want to be true to yourself, and eventually I found that the only way, if I'm in any position like that, I have to follow my instinct and be honest with what I think it is. Okay, I didn't always try to complete a song. I tried to get a vibe of something to present to Paul or Gene. I actually did like to present sometimes to Gene. I was less concerned about presenting a more more complete idea of a song. It's funny, there's a movie coming out just now called Hell or High Water. Well, that was the song that we wrote, okay? And it's a great title. It's a saying, people just blurt that out. And I had all the chords, but no melody for it except for the chorus idea. So then Gene loved it, and then we developed it, and the next thing I know, we have a song, okay? Paul, I would be less likely to want to present all that to him. I'd rather just I got this cool riff, and I know there's a song in there, you know what I mean? And then maybe we wrote Jungle, from this one riff that started it, or the some parts of, there'd be little sections of Tough Love from the Revenge album that I had a riff that Bob Ezrin and him responded to, and then we're writing a song together. I learned how to present songs to each one of them, which was a little bit of a challenge, but
so band politics, in a way, plays into the creative process too. Is that fair to say?
It's in everything in life, politics. A band is a family, and there's always a what I like to call the pecking order of who's really in charge. And sometimes in a relationship, an observer may think that the guy's the dominant one, and it's really the woman is. You know what I mean? So it's always hard for people to understand who might really be more controlling the situation and that person's desires happening. And certainly in many ways with Kiss, even though Gene is very much out there as like a big, everyone knows he's not shy about sharing his opinion about business, and everybody knows he's a intensely, intelligent marketing person and everything, and always talks about that. But Paul is super sharp, and in general, Paul's going to get the final say, not Gene. But a lot of people don't see that, from the outside. So that's why the dynamics of every group are a little different when you're on the inside, understanding things more than what you may see. Now, certainly, we know that Keith Richards and Mick Jagger have their good and bad days. Everybody knows when he wrote that book, that Mick didn't like it too much because he probably said some things in there that wasn't so flattering to him. But generally, most big bands, there's those two people. You can go back from Led Zeppelin to the Stones and Kiss and the Beatles for sure. We all love George Harrison and Ringo. They wouldn't have, you don't feel like it would be the same without Ringo. But when you think of, well, who were the ones steering the band? It was John and Paul, of course, in the Beatles. So every band has those dynamics. And I could just add that, for example, Grand Funk, the version that I'm working in, which is till Mel and Don are able to use that name, Grand Funk Railroad. But do I feel like I'm competing with the original, what everybody knows from the 70s? No, it's a different version of the band. And since we do some new songs, but we're not like putting out an album every year or two like most of the other bands that I've worked with. So it's not the same in the sense of my years in Kiss, for example, or any other band that I may have had a very instrumental part in writing or things like that. And our job, what Grand Funk is now, is to get out there and play live and celebrate what I feel is great classic rock music. And I know that the crowds that we play for, which are all different generations, really have an amazing time. So that's the win there, that I get to play my guitar for those people. But we're not doing like we're Kiss each album and we needed to progress and you change a little bit and maybe we're doing music that's a little different, reflecting how we feel at the time. It's a completely different thing. Well, people that are gifted enough to write a great song, write an anthem or a hit, it's really incredible that the inspiration can happen anywhere. Paul McCartney talks about dreaming of yesterday with the title Scrambled Eggs, okay? But that had the right syllables, right? There's an inspiration, there's a connection that the artist that's creating the song has with his, I call it their inner muse, where they just kind of, it comes from somewhere that there it is. I know when I'm really in that moment when it happens, it's very hard to define. You want it to happen all the time if you're trying to write an album, but just suddenly you're playing the guitar and maybe you're even watching TV while you're playing the guitar and all of a sudden your fingers are doing a certain riff that you think, this is cool. And then you mute the TV and you try to record it and capture it, and maybe you finish it right then, maybe you just tuck it away and then revisit it a while later. There's no rule to it. I really don't feel there is. Certainly when you're going to collaborate with somebody, if Keith Richards and Mick Jagger are going to write a song together, maybe Keith has some ideas, he presents it to Mick and they develop it from there. I mean, that's how it worked with me with Kiss. But I will say that music that I've written completely by myself, it's really interesting how sometimes it can really like, you like own it. You become the chords and the melody, and you just kind of feel it, and you kind of just like bleh, you know what I mean, and hopefully capture it. And it's real interesting that you can imagine what the other instruments would play, even though they're not there. Those instruments, you're not in a studio, you're not working with other players, and it's fascinating how that works. You can't force great songwriting. Now, years ago, there were all these things in the Brill Building, which is a very famous New York publishing building in Manhattan, that those writers that had to write for all these, they could be for Broadway or for the famous artists that were mostly singers and not the people who wrote the music. And these, people needed to get together and write, and they did. They were really gifted to begin with. So even though they may have looked at it like, okay, I'm booked from 12 to 6 to write, okay? Mm-hmm. But I will admit that most artists, it's not structured like that, if you get what I'm saying. Most artists, they're just inspired by something. Their heart's broken, they play a sad couple of chords, and next thing I know, they're writing this incredible love song about something that they feel, and sometimes just lyrics come first for people. Sometimes it's clearly just a riff, and then all of a sudden you have this incredible song. There's no real one way it happens, but it is an inspiration, and it is I feel like the best stuff comes very natural. Well, modern technology has given the opportunity for people that are not amazing with certain instruments, from drums to certainly vocals, and they're able to manipulate the sound waves, because now it's digital, okay, and they can make it perfect, and they can make your drum beat perfect, and they can tune your guitar even, and they can move things around. I do think it sterilizes music. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not saying I haven't used it, but I try to use it in the most organic approach that I can, because I want the music to feel like something. And I love the fact that it was really incredible what some of the earlier classic rock bands created without any of those tricks. You listen to the vocals of the Beatles, I mean, you can't beat that. They had nothing technical to assist them except for reverb. Yes, John Lennon found out by doubling his voice, he thought he was a good singer. The guy was a fucking amazing singer, period. He always wanted his voice double-tracked. And there I am years later working with Kiss, and Gene Gene sang some of the big hits too. I know all the times I worked with him, he wanted his vocals doubled. And he can nail it too. It just gave it a sound, But what's going on now, because of Pro Tools and all the modern technology of digital music, is very, very, it can sterilize you, it can take the heart and soul out, it can cookie cut everything. I hear that a lot in some of the new pop artists. Now a song started with like, I need a beat. There's guys that sell beats. A beat is something electronically they created. They sampled something. Okay, so it started with something real, probably, but it could even come from a drum machine. And here's your beat, and here's a bass groove to it. Okay, and now go write a song. Now, I'm creative. You throw a beat at me, I could probably write something right now. Okay, I don't want to write music like that. You know what I'm saying? But a lot of the stuff nowadays with the new pop artists, it has changed greatly, Now there are certainly some artists out there that are just going back to the way it was. So that exists too in new artists. But there are many new artists that are huge and tour big, that a lot of it's done in this very odd, manipulated, mechanical, electronic, digital world. And it's pretty mind-blowing that they seem to are able to be very popular from it in some ways, But I do like the way some bands like Radiohead have pushed the limit and have been very creative. Meatloaf, okay. We were booed off the stage at the first gig, opening for Cheap Trick. We were signed through a small label tied to Epic, okay, because there was a guy in Cleveland that believed, and he got his own kind of label name, okay. So this guy, Steve Popovich, had Cleveland International Records. That didn't matter, okay. What mattered was he had a friend at Epic. Maybe he worked there, I don't remember his history. But without him believing in Meatloaf, the record would not be this. I think it's sold over 40 million now, okay. That's how incredible it is. So it's on Epic in a sense, okay, Epic was part of CBS, okay. And you notice these things, just like all the conglomerates in industries like cell phones and everything, how they all merge and take over and change names and everything. All that was going on throughout the 60s, 70s, and onward, okay? And it was all about, my experience from the Meatloaf thing was to see how after the big radio convention that they probably spent, an incredible amount of money schmoozing everybody for this crazy convention in New Orleans that we played at, and Bruce Springsteen was there and he thought it was amazing, and next thing you know, they committed and started to really put money into it. So now the radio stations are getting pressured. These promo guys that were very powerful through many of these decades that we're talking about with classic rock, that knew how to get that song on the radio. Years later, you saw people like Prince write Slave on their face because he wanted to get out of his record deal with Warner Brothers, and he realized he had a contract that was not attractive to him anymore. And then eventually, when he was able to break away, he put out music himself. So that has nothing to do with the change, the radical change in the distribution. Prince's issue was more really about like, how long do you own the stuff that I created? Well, the label's position was, we gave you money for record it, we promoted it, we marketed it, we distributed it, we manufactured it. You get what I mean? So they were very heavy-handed that way, that the artist was lucky to see, you know, a great deal would be like you saw, you know, 10% of the money, 20% of the money, once it was all recouped. Okay, and you know what that word means. So every promo guy that was paid to get it on the radio, the budgets for all that, they could look at all of that to be against your money. The history of the, you know, industry regarding record labels really evolved in very, very complex ways. But, you know, I got to think the labels from the era of like the British invasion and the Beatles, a lot of them were just related to publishers, and they had a very innocent start here, where I don't know if they realized the power of what was to come and the huge amount of sales that would be created. I don't know if they saw anything like it since, let's say, you know, Sinatra and bands like, you know, artists like that rather. But with the Beatles selling that many 45s and then albums, and just to show you how dysfunctional it even just started, you know that, you know, the Beatles being a British band were signed to a British label now. Now they're huge in America. So now you're starting this global economy of music, right? And the American label Capitol, which turned into Capitol, wanted to manipulate what songs came out and all compared to the British release because of their desires for what they thought would be marketing-wise the smartest thing. And now, of course, if you're a big Beatle fan, you're aware of the original releases from the Beatles in England compared to the U.S. counterparts, you know. So what I'm trying to use that as an example is like they were learning and going at it, but it's all about marketing, profit, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Obviously, there were plenty of bands that wanted in on the British invasion, and you have these guys that are called A&R guys, or artist in repertoire is what that meant, which means you find new bands because you don't know who's the next big artist, right? And it was almost, it grew and grew and grew, and marketing was so important. Controlling the people on the radio, which was a scandal in the decade before, okay?
In the 50s?
Yes. There was scandals with that, with payola and things like that. But now you're talking about FM being bigger, having a bigger, you know, broader reach even, and it tied into massive concerts. And if you think about it, between the manipulation of the radio and scoring that big station and how they would spend money or favors instead of doing money, sometimes it was drugs and a hooker, okay, you know, to make that radio station support that new band and and then if the reaction comes in on the phones to play more of that band, you know, next thing you know, they're getting heavy spends, and then the band seems to take off. Ultimately, the public is going to respond or not, okay? But if you have something amazing, if you have a product that is, you know, game changing, if you don't get it to the public, it won't really matter, right? So you needed this entire process, this entire way of getting it on the radio, getting it exposed to the people, then to get the records distributed to the stores. So what was really interesting about the label, it was almost a game that they had, and they were the only way to become a star during certain years of the eras that we're embracing here, because they were able to get you on the radio, they were able to market it, and then they manufactured it, and then they distributed it. So they controlled all of those things. So if you had a major record company deal with any of the big major labels, you relied on them to do all of that. And all you had to do really was make your album, and go promote it if they wanted to interview you, and then perform your ass off and go tour with usually their money too. So in essence, they were acting like a bank for you. That wasn't actually a secured loan. It wasn't like if they gave a band a couple $100,000 to get going, you didn't owe them that if it fell on its face. But boy, if you took off, they got their money, and they got a lot of money, and they got a lot of your money, and it would take a very long time for you to get any money, if you get what I'm saying, because they did control quite a bit of who you were in the sense of your product, okay? So you can sell 1 million records, and I mean vinyl, back in the days when that's how you sold your music, and you still owed them money. But you're probably playing a big tour, and that money's yours, okay? You might be selling merchandise, I would hope, and that money's yours. So you see what I mean? It was very interesting how it all worked, but without the labels, the bands couldn't have gotten out there. Without the bands, the labels wouldn't have made all that money.
Is that the same case now with the internet?
No.
How has the internet changed everything?
So the game changer came in when the internet was a way for people to readily and very instantaneously hear things, enjoy music. Once MP3 files were created, which is a compressed version of a music experience that should actually sonically be much larger, but it's acceptable enough. Once that happened, now in 20 seconds I could send you a song on your smartphone, and maybe even years ago it took a little longer, but it didn't matter. But then you had that on your device and you can listen to it whenever you want. The labels did not recognize how much they were behind the curve of what was to come. And they probably had some opportunities earlier on, which Metallica was very, very passionate about stopping the Napsters and everything, and they got very, very into it. And the labels really just dropped the ball with maybe figuring out where it was heading. I don't think they believed it because they had so many years of it being done one way. The way that music was now delivered potentially to your ears, into your home, into your pocket, was such a game changer that it really destroyed the labels. They had no idea that I can write a song if people liked it and they heard the song on the YouTube or saw that, and it gets 1 million hits, like some of these new artists that become famous that way. It just goes viral now. Viral is a word that obviously you think of a disease, but now we also know it relates to the internet. There really isn't a record industry the way I remembered it. So you get what I mean? It's really a new world with everything. Is it better? Not to me. But I do embrace the technology because I like the convenience of things too. If I'm reading an article in one of my magazines of a band like, I heard of that guy, I never checked him out. Boom. Within 5 seconds, I could potentially pull up a sample of that person or an entire song from whatever, YouTube or Spotify, and I'm checking them out. And you know what? I make a point of supporting the music distribution, things like Spotify and Pandora and Apple Music. So all of it's changed, and it's made, in some ways, the machine that I was describing earlier of how a label took a talent and then, recorded it, paid for it, marketed it, manufactured it, distributed it, maybe did some really crazy, nasty things to get it on the radio, but they did all that, okay? And they owned you to do that. But that process was the only way it happened and the only way it could happen. Now you remove that, and everybody can create a song, can make a video, can deliver it to the World Wide Web, right? Meaning the internet. And then anyone, anywhere in the world, if they want to, and they're turned on to it, or through one of the social media sites, it starts to get traction. Then suddenly without any of those things I just mentioned that the labels did to make you a star, and potentially you're a star. You know, I used to be like, so like, why do I want to record on a GarageBand program? And now I realize, you know, wow, I can make that thing sound pretty good. This is incredible. It's incredible, and the same thing that I can you know, surf the internet with and check my emails and book a flight or get a boarding pass from, that I can actually also record something quite respectable. That's remarkable, electronically and just technology speaking. Remarkable that can be done. It doesn't make what people are able to do better. It just now is a whole nother world we live in with all these things. Who would ever think, you know, I grew up in New York, and you know, you either struggle with the subway, you not wise, own a car, or you take a taxi where you gotta go. Now we have something called Uber. Where on your phone, they know where you are, and boom, they're there in like usually 5 minutes to come get you. And you don't even have to do anything, giving them anything, because your credit card's stored on the, you get what I mean? And I can go to Amazon now, and I can't get that ginger ale I really like, that brand, at my local store anymore. They don't carry it. And then the next day, there it is in my home. It's delivered to me by just clicking a couple of, you know, prompts on the phone. All that's remarkable. And all that in the same way that our buying habits and our flying habits of being a, you know, there's something good about being a travel agent when you need a travel agent. There is a value to it. But you know, you can book your flight to wherever you want in the world yourself, right from the same phone that you're going to call your, you know, wife or girlfriend or mother on. It's nuts. And you can also record a really good demo, or record what I'm saying right now on your smartphone. So all that's changed. Here it is. People want to hear music. People want to see music. I think the live thing is very strong still. That's a fact. You can look at the, you know, numbers of, you know, ticket sales, and then even a band like Grand Funk that we can play for thousands and thousands of people at some of these like unusual venues. People want to see music. Thank God. The blues and many of the great blues artists that certainly bands like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin heard, it very much influenced them. And they plug into something that's powerful, and then it becomes timeless. And, you know, not that long ago, I bought a B.B. King vinyl, because I like to shop for vinyl, and I was still a big fan. What he could do on the guitar, I know it helped people like Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page, and a guy like Robert Johnson, who was before that. Some of the things that he did, more likely with his voice than the guitar, you know, were very powerful and inspired a lot of what we know now as the beginnings of rock and roll. So I think the blues were important. I could sit and jam the blues for an hour and not be bored. I just think music is an emotion, a powerful emotion, and since there's so much feeling that good artists put into their performance, and it doesn't matter if you're dancing around or just standing there, really emoting your heart and soul into the performance that you're doing.
People still believe in the power of rock and roll music.
Hey, thanks for watching. My name is Daniel Sarkisian. I'm an independent filmmaker from Toronto.
I hate that guitar, but I can play that in one scale.
Don't you dare laugh.
You know, I try to embrace the rock and roll spirit in the sense of I do everything self-funded and independently made with no oversight. As such, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for watching.